that image is going to be tied to certain spiritual messages.
والنجم إذا هوى ما ضل صاحبكم وما غوى.
Beguina TV doesn't just teach you about the Quran. You can also learn Arabic from a brilliant teacher. Ustad Nouman Ali Khan has made this beautiful ancient language easy to understand. So you're not only improving your language skills, but your understanding of the Quran too. Tap now to check out Beguina TV.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم والنجم إذا هوى ما ضل صاحبكم وما غوى وما ينطق عن الهوى إن هو إلا وحي يوحى علمه شديد القوى ذو مرة فاستوى وهو بالأفق الأعلى ثم دنا فتدلى فكان قاب قوسين أو أدنى رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي فالحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Everyone, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. If you can show the screen, please. I'm going to start by giving you some important comments, some important concepts that you should be aware of. This is for you, not for me. And I'm going to walk you through this. We discussed this sporadically yesterday, but we're going to try to organize our thoughts a little bit. This will not just help you with Surah An-Najm, this will help you in the study of Makkan Quran altogether. So I've started talking to you about contemplating the Quran. These are some things that will help you contemplate the Quran when you're reading it. Okay, so let's go through each of them. The first of them is visual imagery for spiritual truths. What's the visual imagery in this surah that it started with? It's the star as it falls, or Pleiades as it falls, right? And that image is going to be tied to certain spiritual messages. I haven't completed the discussion on those spiritual messages yet, but at least you're aware there's going to be a connection between those two things. Allah does this in Surah Al-Adiyat. Many connections, and among them, Allah describes, bandits that are raiding a town in the early morning. They're going to raid a town and they're unsuspecting and they just ravage through the whole town. And from there, the discussion is going to be how unannounced and shocking the arrival of Judgment Day is going to be, that is going to ravage through the earth, right? So there's the visual image, and it's tied to a spiritual truth. That's the first thing, and this is something that happens throughout the Makkan Quran. Behind each of these, there's fancy Arabic terms that can make you sound really Islamic, but I'm not interested in that right now. I just want you to understand the concept, okay? The second one is the major strands in the Makkan Quran. So in the surahs of the Makkan Quran, you'll find some major themes. I listed a few of them for you, a few of the major ones. There are more, they're not that many, but you should be aware of them, and you should see how the sequence of those different strands are being reconfigured in a certain surah, and it's being reconfigured differently in a different surah. And sometimes there's more of one thing and less of another, right? So for example, you can find Surah Al-Insan is something I was studying in Malaysia last month. And in Surah Al-Insan, usually Allah talks about heaven, He talks about hell, right? Or, both. And in Surah Al-Insan, He mentions punishment in like one ayah, and the majority of the rest of the surah is about Jannah. Like the proportion is very different, you understand? And you can go to something like Surah Al-Qiyamah and you'll find very little about Jannah, and you'll find a lot about the destruction and the horrors of Judgment Day and the afterlife, right? So you can find this interesting shift in something is more stressed, something is less stressed, something is not mentioned at all, something is being highlighted. And that's what I mean by the strands inside of the surahs. Then I talked about the continuity of strands between surahs. What that means is, let's say there's stories of the prophets that's mentioned in one surah. It might very well be that something based on what was taught about the stories of the prophets will come up in the next surah, building on what was left off in the previous one. An interesting strand from the last surah. We're doing Surah An-Najm right now, and the surah right before it is Surah Al-Tur. And I didn't add this as a concept here. It's called dovetailing in English. But I'll tell you what it is. The last ayah of Surah Al-Tur is وَمِنَ اللَّيْلِ فَسَبِّحْهُ وَأَدْبَارَ النُّجُومِ. Declare the perfection of Allah, especially on the backs of the stars, meaning as the stars are about to disappear. Last ayah of Surah number 52. First ayah of Surah number 53, وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى أَدْبَارَ النُّجُومِ إِدْبَارُ النُّجُومِ وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى. You see a continuity there, right? So this is what I also mean by strands. There's a continuity of thought in the Quran. Too often as Muslims, this is not just you, this is me, this is everybody. We hear about an ayah, we hear about a story, right? We hear about some small part of an ayah or a ruling, and Quran is used as a dalil, like you're making a point and you're going to use this ayah as your evidence, right? But we're not actually studying the Quran. We're studying this other topic, and we only use the Quran as a reference, right? So the Quran just becomes this repository of references instead of being read as a book. And one of the things that tadabbur will make us do, this idea of contemplating the Quran, we're not going to treat the Quran as a set of proofs, as a set of evidences for other concepts or for other ideas. We're going to look at the Quran for itself. Like, my concern isn't what can I prove or disprove from this ayah. My concern is what's Surah An-Najm about. That's my topic. You understand? So all too often, and this once I put this filter on like 23 years ago, and it changed the way I see Islam, and it changed the way I appreciate what people are talking about. You could tell immediately this person has a topic in their mind, and now they're surrendering the Quran and the evidences from the Prophet ﷺ. They're taking all of that just to make their point. But the ultimate goal for them is their point. It's not actually the ayat. And this can get to such an extreme where even students of Islamic studies, they're reading something that a scholar wrote, and the scholar quoted an ayah, right? And you know what they'll do? They'll read what the scholar wrote with a lot of attention. When they get to the ayah, they'll say, yeah, okay, that's a dalil. Let me keep reading ahead. The only part they'll skip is the Quran. And these are advanced students in Islamic studies, and this is a very common phenomenon, right? And that's also, it's an unconscious departure from tadabbur, from this idea that Quran takes center stage. It's supposed to be at the center of our thinking. Anyway, so the next concept that I mentioned to you was the three different kinds of audiences, right? You can have a neutral audience, you can have an unsure audience, and you can have an opposing audience. You remember that? Right? And the thing I told you is, for a neutral audience, you don't need to stress your speech too much. For an unsure audience, you at least stress it once. And for more than one stress, that might mean that you're talking to an opposing audience. The oath is a kind of stress. The use of ma is a kind of stress. So the opening of Surah An-Najm is talking to an opposing audience. That becomes evident from the style with which it speaks. Surah Al-Rahman keeps repeating itself. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. I know people love listening to that recitation and saying, oh, it sounds so nice. But the point is, in ancient Arabic, in ancient Arabia, when someone's repeating themselves over and over again, isn't that a kind of stress? What does that tell you about Surah Al-Rahman? Who is it talking to originally? The opposing audience. It's actually talking to opponents, you know? So this will change your perception of who is the addressee, first and foremost, in these ayat. Okay? Then, of course, there's the coherence, structure, and design of a surah. This is, something that I very strongly believe in, that Allah revealed a surah as a unit, and it's an expression of His wisdom, and everything in the surah is stitched together and tied together. And just like a good author has organized speech, Allah is the author of all creation. And in every one of the things He created, there's order and a system. The joints in my fingers have a system, and there's an order. There's a method to the entire universe. There's a system under which the stars move the way that they move, and the earth rotates the way that it rotates. There's a system for the distance between us and the sun. There's a system and an order and a design down to the most subatomic level that Allah created. And somehow we assume that there is no system or design in a surah that He gave. I don't understand that. How can the surah be random when nothing Allah does is random? How can the surah be chaotic and sporadic and talking about all kinds of things when nothing Allah does is chaotic? He's the one who he created mizan to begin with, balance and scale. How can his speech not have balance and scale, right? So that I'm a very strong proponent of that. Of course, when you're reading a translation of the Quran, you might feel like the subject just kind of changed, and then it changed again, and then it changed again. What's going on here? Or does he already talked about this? Why is he talking about this again? And all of those questions get answered with the study of the coherence, structure, and design of a surah. This also helps you understand that the Quran cannot be human. Like one of the ways that it becomes clearer to me every time I study it, the coherence of a surah, this is not human design. Human beings cannot speak like this. They don't organize like this. They don't organize thoughts like this. They don't organize concepts like this. This is beyond human capability. And as we go through Surah An-Najm, I'm going to keep highlighting the structure. When we get to a certain portion, I'll say, hey, look at this design. Look at Allah's design in these ayat. Then go to the next section, look at Allah's design in these ayat. You know?